This next session, I said this last night informally to Laura, but Laura McKay is from Virginia. She now is retired, but she can't give up her passion for the ocean, so she keeps supporting the efforts. But I honestly can say that the whole Ocean Data Portal would not have happened if it wasn't 15 years ago. Laura McKay supported the state of Virginia to develop a spatial data plan and said, why don't we bring this to the region? So it really was quite literally Laura's idea. That then was able to sort of build on sort of the support from NOAA and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to really build out this really state-of-the-art world-class portal data information center. And now that's absorbing all the research that Katie mentioned as well. So really I have a personal thank you to Laura for really starting this process in motion 15 years ago. And I'm happy you're still here to help us carry forward with the next challenges. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Laura, and the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tony. And thank you, Katie, for a great inspirational talk. It really is so incredible how far we've come since, I think we started in 2008. And I just want to note, I think this year is the 15th anniversary of Marco and its existence. So yay, Marco. All right, well, we'll hop right into it. So this session on conservation management strategies and policies, we've got a great lineup here. We have two people who are going to be coming in remote. And first is going to be a presentation on area-based management by Lauren Wenzel, who is with NOAA's National Marine Protected Areas. And then we're going to transition to Mimi Diorio, who I worked with years ago on doing participatory GIS for identifying recreational uses in the ocean, which was a blast. And then Michelle Bachman is going to talk to us about conservation area designation with fisheries. And then my colleague, Will, I got to hire a couple years ago with Virginia CZM, is going to talk about a Virginia Ocean Plan. So with that, are we ready with Lauren? Hey, Lauren.
Yeah, hi, Laura. Hi, everybody. I really wish I could be with you in the room, but I appreciate you all being so flexible and letting us join remotely. Happy new federal fiscal year for those of you who celebrate. That's why we're not with you. But happy to kick this off. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Are you seeing my screen and you hearing me okay?
We are. You sound great.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. So I am going to be sharing some work from a variety of people today, kind of taking advantage of this to give you some background on recent U.S. actions to understand and conserve ocean biodiversity. So going a little bit beyond just area-based management, just to share some recent developments. So I wanted to note that I am from NOAA's Marine Protected Areas Center, and we act as a clearinghouse and a catalyst for all things area-based management, particularly marine protected areas set aside for long-term conservation in the ocean. And so in that role, we really are connectors of people and places, and this is a great venue to have some of these discussions about how these places are connected and how we can work together on our conservation goals. So today, I'm going to talk about the National Ocean Biodiversity Strategy, the National Marine Sanctuary updates in the Mid-Atlantic, namely the designation of Hudson Canyon, and just to give you a teaser, a new issue on the horizon, which is thinking about high seas MPAs. So first I'm going to talk about the National Biodiversity Strategy, and you might ask, although I think probably folks in this room would not ask this question, they would know, but why do we need a national scale initiative for ocean biodiversity? And this map may kind of help answer that question. Here's a story in the New York Times. This map shows where biodiversity is most at risk in America. So what's missing from this picture? Yes, the oceans and the Great Lakes and the coasts and the estuaries. These areas make up more than the area of the land area of the United States, and yet they're completely missing from this picture. And we know that they are foundational in terms of the ocean economy, our basic food security, the oxygen that our ocean produces. So there's really a lot of work that needs to be done to better understand ocean biodiversity and also to increase awareness of the importance of ocean biodiversity. And we're also seeing an increasing recognition of the linkages between climate and biodiversity. see the IPBES and the IPCC. These are the two UN bodies responsible, respectively, for biodiversity and climate change, coming together to host a workshop on how we need to address these issues together. Climate change not only threatens biodiversity, but as Katie, our speaker just this morning, noted, biodiversity is an incredibly powerful tool for mitigating and adapting to climate change impacts. We need to be thinking about these challenges together. And there was a recent paper accepted to Science that I thought really put this very well. The authors noted that we envision a mosaic of interconnected, protected, and shared spaces, including intensively used spaces, to strengthen self-sustaining biodiversity and the capacity of people and nature to adapt to and mitigate to climate change and nature's contribution to people. And that sentence really reminded me of the Mid-Atlantic. That's why I wanted to include it, because we have natural spaces, we also have intensively used spaces, and we have a real opportunity to look holistically across this landscape and think about how we can achieve our conservation goals. And of course, we have pressing needs for biodiversity data. In the last 4 years, we've had a lot of interest and support from this administration in the topics of climate and biodiversity, and there has been a flood of policy documents outlining vision and strategies for how to move forward on the ocean economy, or ocean climate, or ocean conservation, and ocean justice. And all of these policy initiatives rely on sound biodiversity data that we are really lacking. And so this really brought to the fore the need for a biodiversity strategy. And that was released just this past June during Ocean Week by the Office of Science and Technology. And this was the first roadmap from federal agencies to take collective action to enhance, rebuild, and sustain the benefits of biodiversity in our oceans, coasts, and Great Lakes. But even though this was a federal report, it really notes that there is a whole of society approach needed. And again, I thought, Katie, our speaker from New Jersey, really highlighted this in terms of the nature-based solutions that she mentioned that apply to both public and private lands. We need to be thinking about the contributions that all of us can make and how we can work together on this. So the biodiversity strategy has 3 goals. To drive delivery of ocean biodiversity knowledge at the national scale, to strengthen tools and institutions to deliver ocean biodiversity knowledge, and to protect, conserve, restore, and sustainably use ocean biodiversity. So you'll see that this, this is really driven by the need for better science, data management, and data sharing, but all foundational to better decisions and better conservation, so that the living nature that we rely on can continue to sustain us and our ways of life. The Marine Biodiversity Dialogues really built on the work that went into the national strategy, and this was funded by the Lenfest Ocean Foundation, and it wanted to look at working with knowledge holders at a variety of scales and backgrounds to ask the question, are we managing and protecting biodiversity? How and in what ways? So really beginning to engage a broad swath of people from different sectors and perspectives on these questions about how do we benefit from biodiversity, how do we value it, how do we manage it? And so there have been 3 regional case studies in Puget Sound, Gulf of Mexico, and Chesapeake Bay that have allowed us to pull together knowledge holders, stakeholders in these regions and explore these questions about how people benefit from and value biodiversity. So I wanted to switch gears now and talk a little bit about sanctuary designation in the Mid-Atlantic. This is a national map. You'll see that the blue dots are established national marine sanctuaries. The triangles are marine national monuments that are part of the sanctuary system. And the yellow squares are proposed sanctuaries. This is a really historic time for the sanctuaries program. There are 5 sanctuaries in designation, which hasn't happened in decades. So there's a lot of energy and momentum around establishing new national marine sanctuaries. some of you are probably familiar with the idea that these sanctuaries are generally nominated by local communities with community-based support because people recognize that these places are special and need additional protection. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the status of Hudson Canyon, which is about 100 miles southwest of New York, and is the largest submarine canyon on the East Coast. A place of tremendous dynamic oceanographic processes and biological diversity, and one that has a long-standing importance and history with mariners, but also with indigenous peoples. And so this sanctuary is being considered in order to provide long-term conservation of the area's marine wildlife and coastal resources, also to identify and raise awareness of indigenous connections to the area, to highlight and promote sustainable uses of the area, to expand ocean science and education, and to provide a platform for collaborative and diverse partnerships that support long-term management of the area. So I think this is really exciting to see another national marine sanctuary in the Mid-Atlantic. We do have a sanctuary at Mallows Bay, Potomac, which protects a collection of historic shipwrecks. So Hudson Canyon would be a new addition to the program, and really, as that last bullet highlights, really create an opportunity to work together in the area to better understand and protect it. And so this is the process. The public scoping began 2 years ago in June 2022. There were public meetings. There was a tremendous amount of public interest and support in the comments. And NOAA established a pre-designation advisory council in 2023. And I'll talk about that more in a second. But basically, this is where we are now. We're developing a sanctuary proposal. And so pulling in all that information that we heard during scoping, writing a draft environmental impact statement, management plan, and proposed rule. Then it will go through clearance and interagency review. And then those draft designation documents will be published and will be available for public comment. So everybody can, comment, tell us what they think, how they meet people's goals or could be changed to strengthen them. And then there will be final designation documents that will be published. And then 45 days after Congress has been meeting, the sanctuary becomes effective. So I mentioned the Sanctuary Advisory Council that was established last year. And this is just a great tool for allowing NOAA to stay connected with the community during the designation process. Because as you saw, it's a multi-year process, and it's great to have an opportunity to stay engaged, understand what the community is thinking, bring community knowledge into decision-making, really draw on the expertise of people who know a lot about the area, and also bring some of those ideas into the designation documents, such as the management plans, based on that community perspective. So the next steps, there will be a scientific research cruise next summer, and also during 2025, we can expect to see the draft documents. So we'll definitely be sharing those widely, and we'll share them through Marco. And then be continuing to develop the final designation documents. So I'm now going to turn just one slide on my last topic, which is the high seas. This is probably not something you were thinking you were going to hear about today, with a conference focused on the Mid-Atlantic, but as we know, the ocean is connected. We have one ocean. And I just thought this would be interesting for you all to be aware of. This was a historic effort recently, last year, to agree on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, or BD&J for short. I said last year, I meant this year. This just happened in the UN. And this treaty has 4 components: marine genetic resources, how to identify and share them, including benefits sharing among countries, area-based management, including MPAs, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and tech transfer. So the area-based management piece is the one that we've been tracking most closely. And once the treaty goes into force, and that will happen when it's been ratified by 60 countries, so maybe 2 or 3 years from now, countries can then bring forward forward proposals to establish high seas MPAs. Those need to recognize that there are existing bodies that have management capabilities. The treaty was designed not to override those capabilities, but to complement those, so that regional fishery management organizations or the International Maritime Organization that governs international shipping would be deferred to in terms of their authorities and expertise, but we would be able to build on those to provide additional levels of protection in a particular place that's of specific value. And this map, these are not MPAs, but these are areas that are under some kind of management now. And so they illustrate that, the management process for the high seas has been underway for some years. And this is the next step in that process that allows us to really formalize and build on existing protection to provide sort of more comprehensive levels of protection. So stay tuned for more on that. And that's what I have, so I'll stop there, and I look forward to the discussion after the rest of the panelists. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was great. It's really exciting, too, to hear about that High Seas initiative. I hadn't known about that, so thank you. And good luck with that. And selfishly, I hope someday we can have a Norfolk Canyon Sanctuary, too, down off Virginia. But anyhow, I also want to ask, can you all see the screen? Are our heads in the way? Okay, great. So next we have Mimi Diorio. And Mimi, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes. Hi, Mimi. Sorry, I have to turn all the way around to try to see you.
Laura, long time no see.
I know.
See your face.
It's great to see you. And so you're also with NOAA's Marine Protected Areas program, and Mimi graciously got up at, I don't know what god-awful time this morning on the West Coast to be with us. So thank you, Mimi. And I see your slides have come up, and so take it away.
Awesome. Hopefully you guys can hear me and see my slides. Thanks
You're all
for the
good.
opportunity today. I have to say that I was recently in New Jersey with my kids. First time that they've been to the Jersey Shore since they've been old enough to appreciate it. And saw horseshoe crabs and the jetties. And anyway, it's where I first found my ocean connection. As a kid, I was raised in my early years in Pennsylvania. And Jersey Shore was home to me for the ocean environment. So it was great to see my kids connect. So love New Jersey. It's a great opportunity to be here today and share with you some of the work that I've been doing at the MPA Center and beyond. If you didn't catch that, I work with Lauren at NOAA's MPA Center. I'm based out in California. And my role really is about data and storytelling around MPAs and conservation. So, I wasn't on the call or on the meeting yesterday, but just from the sound bites from what I heard from Katie and what Lauren presented, data access, information about understanding ocean life is a critical piece to the story. If we're trying to preserve and conserve biodiversity, whether we are looking to site for offshore renewable energy, whether we're looking for sustainable fisheries in changing climate, data is the foundation. So I'm a data advocate. My role is to hope to connect data to policy and to hope to connect information to developing initiatives to better understand our ocean. And another point that really resonated with me, what Katie said, is people protect what they know, and they care about what they know about. And so we have a real onus to translate data, to not just collect data, but make data accessible in ways that's intuitive to understand agencies involved, and NOAA was really the voice, primary voice for the marine side, and me and others involved in that effort. So we're focused on creating a data inventory about what we know about conservation areas, what areas we're protecting, what areas we have boundaries for with respect to area-based management. Similarly for restoration efforts. Also data collection on reporting units. How do we communicate out what we're protecting? For instance, on land, census tracts and zip codes and watersheds in the marine environment, marine ecological units, and more on that. The need for better reporting units in the marine environment. Also collection of data on biodiversity, equity, and climate, which proved to be an incredible challenge actually to find data that covered these interests. To the right on the slide is the framework that we developed that sort of explains what was counted towards the metrics reported out, preliminary metrics of the beta atlas, and that's something that's still underway in development. So a quick view of the atlas, if you haven't seen it, it's basically an interactive map that shows a variety of data layers that speak to how we are progressing towards conservation across the lands and waters through these 6 themes. I won't read them, I'll show you next here. There's a variety of data layers nested within those themes that highlight spatially what we're doing for restoration, resilience, conservation, where we have habitats and corridors and biodiversity data, etc. I think one of the critical things that came from the framework was that we needed current, authoritative, national scale, and relevant and representative data across all of these themes, which I think set the bar and also helped us to realize where we have significant data gap. The interactive map, as an example here, is really just a way to visualize areas that we are considering as conserved, as well as areas that could contribute to conservation. So I think that there's the spectrum there is the intent to show areas that we are thinking we confirm that meet the conservation goals, and others that have yet to be determined. And also then a lot of the data layers that would help us better understand how these areas are communicating or supporting conservation outcomes. And so yeah, the interactive map allows us to cruise around, overlay different layers, click, learn more about those places. And you will also notice that there's a lot of data on the land. I won't show. And then there's a couple of data layers for the marine environment. We just don't really have the spatial continuous data that we'd like to be able to represent a lot of these interests, particularly in the realm of biodiversity, equity, and climate. So there you go. But there's a but here. how do we translate that to a map that actually means something to a stakeholder? And so that comes into the next part of GIS for the ocean, which is data aggregation across multiple scales. So we stack all of this spatial data that's just points, lines, polygons, images of patterns and trends. And then we start to aggregate it at multiple scales to what's known as the hex grid. This is I meant to include the link in here. Uber hex grid is a way to cut the world up into hexagons of a nested scale and aggregate information to those cells to be able to communicate patterns and trends across them. So we are aggregating this large stack of data from climate to governance to habitats and biodiversity and whatnot to these hexagonal cells. And what this allows us to do is to characterize the seascape in a discrete way. So a user who's not a data-friendly data analyst can come in and click on a map, and like a Google map of the ocean, you can learn about this little space off the Channel Islands, and you can learn about it at different scales depending on your interest. And the cool thing is you can learn about a variety of themes. It will help characterize discrete ocean spaces. It will help us identify areas with similar characteristics. So if you were looking for a particular area where there wasn't protection, but there was high biodiversity and a lot of mapped coral species, and there wasn't presence of submarine canyons or submarine cables, excuse me, and you weren't in a shipping lane, you would be able to identify those areas and help cite areas that meet specific criteria. So that's the spirit of GIS for the ocean and the intent. The next steps that we have are to integrate all this data and run a lot of the analytics and build out the platform. So a lot of work ahead, but I have shared with you the goal of what GIS for the ocean is intended to do. We're working on highlighting specific use cases and existing successes. So this speaks to market. We intend to include in this portal highlights of portals and applications that have laid the framework for this type of work. So there's space in there for us to highlight existing work. And also to refine this workflow so that it's reproducible. So the really critical piece is that we'll do this for, say, 50 different data layers, but we want to show folks that you can do this at different scales and how easy it is to integrate information and share it out in ways that are more intuitive. So I think that's all I have. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
Thank you so much, Mimi. And you and Lauren are on the cutting edge of so much good work, so we really appreciate it. And I know that Ocean GIS portal is going to be especially important to those areas that aren't so lucky as Marco to have a regional portal. So that's going to be great for filling in all these gaps too. So such great work. Thank you so much. Thanks for getting up so early. And thanks, Mimi. And so I noticed on the map that she showed, we had so much biodiversity data on the land and so little on the ocean. And then when you looked at what they had for the marine environment, it was mostly fisheries. So that leads us very nicely to Michelle's talk.
Great, thanks.
So take it away, Michelle.
Thank you. So do I tell you when I need the slide advance?
You can come on up.
I can come up.
I'm going to scooch around so I don't get a stiff neck.
Yeah.
Or it could be the clicker if you prefer, but you might not be able to see it.
Like I don't know how to turn like an owl. I'm not an owl. My neck doesn't turn that way.
So you-
Yeah,
Your
great.
start?
Thanks. And I can just use the arrows, right? Okay. Good morning. Great to see everybody. Some folks I've not met before, and some of you that I've worked with in various contexts. So I'm glad that this presentation was after Mimi's, because it's going to kind of, it's really a component piece of the 30 by 30 Atlas effort. We were hoping with this work to contribute to that. Thanks to Jessica Coakley, who some of you may know, she's a colleague of mine at the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council and helped me work through some of these slides, and we have a whole list of other council and NOAA collaborators that we partnered with to do this work. So really what I wanted to cover briefly and properly, this, like going over this effort is probably a 45-minute talk, so I'll just kind of give you a snapshot, and I'm happy to talk with folks afterwards or offline or after this meeting. Just kind of want to cover kind of where the Fishery Management Councils sit in ocean conservation space and a little bit about the work that we do, because it's narrower than some of these other initiatives that we're talking about, and it's kind of a piece of the puzzle, I guess. And then I'll talk about this conservation area inventory project that we've been doing. It's kind of wrapped up, and we're sort of working on rollout and writing a paper about it now. So the council system, I think probably you're at least a little bit familiar, was established in the late 70s. There's 8 regional councils. Here in the Northeast, we've got a New England council. That's who I work for. We're based out of Newburyport, Mass., although I actually grew up in New Jersey, so it's always nice to be back here. And then our counterparts in the Mid-Atlantic, their jurisdiction goes from New York down to Virginia, North Carolina border. But obviously, we work really closely with each other because the species that we are managing are kind of moving between the areas, and we definitely see a lot of mid-Atlantic species in New England, and so there's really a lot of partnership there between our 2 councils and then between other organizations that are doing management, including NOAA in the States, and others as well. And then there's 6 other councils throughout the country that all partner together. The Council Coordination Committee is a convening body for all 8 regional councils, and if you want just a snapshot of council work and how we do things and you want to get connected with any of the individual councils, fisherycouncils.org is a good resource, and the work from this area-based management project is linked off there as well. So fundamentally what councils are doing is, some of the work that we do does lead to ocean conservation and protection of biodiversity and vulnerable species, but really we're writing management plans to guide how people, either for commercial or for recreational reasons, harvest marine species. We're really focused in the federal waters of the EEZ, but many of our species have connections to inshore, so we definitely care about inshore habitat conservation and linkages as well. And fundamentally, our fishery management plans, they have to do a lot of things and balance a lot of different standards and criteria, and we're responsible to other laws, but we're preventing overfishing and rebuilding stocks when they're depleted, which in an era of environmental change is some of these stocks are just persistently not rebuilding, and it's a really challenging problem. So we're definitely very interested in thinking about our work within a broader ecosystem-based context, very data-driven context. We're doing a lot of work. A lot of funding is coming through the Inflation Reduction Act for us to get climate ready for the future so we can help the fishing communities that we manage to be ready for fisheries to continue to change. People have been seeing that on the water already for quite a while. The council process, we really try and be very driven by members of the industry, other participants and stakeholders in the process, broad partnerships. So it's a deliberative, open process that we work through. So this kind of, I think, tees off the slides that Mimi presented related to the 30 by 30 initiative and that executive order. And as the Council Coordination Committee was meeting, they have twice a year kind of big meetings, they decided that they really wanted a subcommittee of its staff and members to get together and say, well, what are the councils doing that might contribute to this? And so our idea was to pull together spatial data and metadata for all of the management areas that we all have developed over the 40 plus years the councils have been in existence, to be able to say, which areas might fit in with these conservation definitions. We were really focused on this OECM or other effective area-based conservation measure concept, not so much a MPA kind of more comprehensive framework, but these pieces, and especially fisheries-oriented OECMs that are balancing conservation with provisioning of resources. The councils designate, this is really probably say spatial fishery management areas for a lot of reasons that you can see here, and it's definitely not simple, and kind of what we're doing and how we're doing it is very nuanced, but I was thinking of it, putting this together, I was like on a continuum of areas that are very holistic, maybe they're larger, maybe they restrict most or all fishing gear types and activities, which is really all we can manage. We can't control oil and gas development or offshore wind or cabling or any other pollution. We can try and influence in those spaces, but really what we're managing is fisheries harvest. And then there's more targeted. The councils have a lot of, we have more areas that are year-round, it turns out, but we have a lot of areas that are seasonal, and councils often will protect a spawning activity that's happening in season, or sometimes, species that are migrating, protected resources, whales and turtles that are only in an area seasonally. We don't need year-round measures to conserve them from fishing impacts. And we do lots of things besides area-based management. Fundamentally, catch limits and accountability measures if those are exceeded, but many other kind of controls and restrictions as well. So all of this is coming together with area-based management to make up these probably overly complicated, sometimes fishery management plans that we write. This is where our subcommittee landed in terms of a definition of a conservation area in a fisheries context. So geographically defined, kind of established in regulation, thinking about, relationship to environmentally adverse fishing activities, and then maintaining the ecology, the biology of the ecosystem and its function while providing opportunities, commercial and recreational fishing opportunities, and seafood to consumers. So we further kind of broke this framework down into 3 different types of areas: ecosystem conservation, council-managed areas, and some other areas that are really more designed around a kind of holistic protection of habitat that's used by fishes, or the councils do have discretionary authority to protect deep-sea coral and sponge ecosystems, and many of the councils have undertaken work in that area, including New England and the Mid-Atlantic. So beyond areas that are really commercially or recreationally harvested. Biodiversity, special ecosystems. So these are all year-round areas that have these kind of fairly durable, more or less indefinite restrictions. We have year-round fishery management areas, which, some of which serve a different, very fishery management-focused function to control harvest, to address fishing mortality, or maybe enhance productivity of a resource. And then we have some seasonal areas. We use this a lot in New England. I was surprised to find that other regions don't use this quite as much. We have a lot of seasonal areas in New England that are focused on especially whales and porpoises and other things that are not fishery targets, but that fisheries do interact with out there in the ocean. So this is just a summary. We have a lot of other results that you can get to through the Fishery Council website. But there's hundreds of areas that, most of these are Fishery Management Council areas. There's a few of these that are designated under other authorities, but my takeaway here, this is, sometimes I feel like this conservation inventory becomes a little bit of a numbers game, but the different regions kind of choose to use area-based management, in some cases, quite a lot, and in some cases in a more measured way, just as they're taking different approaches to implementing their work and developing their FMPs. So certainly as a laboratory, an 8 group laboratory for fishery management approaches, we take different approaches even though we coordinate with each other. And then this just shows you the coverage. Obviously some of the council regions are very vast, and some of them are still very large but quite a bit smaller. So the number of areas, the coverage of the areas also matters, as well as what's being restricted in these areas. And so all of these kind of make sense as different ways to think about it. And I don't think you can think about number of areas without thinking about coverage and without thinking about the measures. And if you've tried to read fishery regulations, I sometimes get stuck on what they mean, even for plans that I work on and have helped write. So we were really trying to break this down in a way that was, fairly simple for this presentation, but then we have a lot of metadata about each of these individual areas, when they were designated, why they were designated, how you can learn more. And really our idea was to provide an input to other analyses so that if you wanted to really understand what it means to, restrict areas of the US EEZ to mobile bottom tending gear, you could feel pretty confident that you understand the number and you understand how well these areas are actually being protected if you wanted the tools to dig in. So, and the councils hadn't assembled this sort of spatial database before, and so it was a fairly big lift to just pull all those pieces together, but I think it's something that will be useful to us and hopefully useful to others. So this is just some maps that show you our two regions in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. These really big blue areas are focused on deep sea coral conservation, and they basically extend from kind of roughly where fishing stops at the edge of the shelf out to the boundary of the EEZ. Both councils didn't want to see fishing expand into those areas in the future. We know that there's a lot of sensitive habitats in the canyons and on the slope, and there's probably a lot of stuff that we don't even understand that hasn't been sampled in the deeper waters. So just freezing the footprint of fishing is really what those areas were about. And then we have a number of other areas as well focused on specific hard bottom habitat conservation, year-round protection and reduction of harvest of certain groundfish species and things like that. And these are just a list of some of the examples of areas we have in the Mid-Atlantic. So that the first one is the Frank Lautenberg Deep Sea Coral Protection Area. That was that big blue area that you saw. Other areas, more habitat focused. Some of our areas are like tilefish. These are animals that burrow into the side of the sediment in the canyons, and we know where their habitat roughly occurs and want to protect it from impact. So we have a lot of products. Encourage you to check some of these out. We worked with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission on the GIS. If you need a GIS contractor for a project, I would definitely recommend them. We have a report. These metadata that I talked about is in all these appendices. We're writing a journal article now, and then we have these map-based resources. And I know we had some NOAA partners on our team, and they were able to provide the information that we'd compiled, which some of it had to be kind of digitally created for this project into the 30 by 30 Atlas effort. So our application is pretty cool. You can just see a screenshot of it. It's much better when it's interactive, but it'll show you in detail all these areas and where they are, and you can explore the different council regions. Making a map at this scale is just tricky to get everything on one page. By the time you're talking way up Alaska towards the Arctic and then way down in the Caribbean, but I think it works fairly well. So this is kind of just in a snapshot what we did as a team. Figured out our own definition of conservation areas. Collectively, we have designated hundreds of management areas. Sometimes we revise those and remove them. Oftentimes we reaffirm them or just adjust them. And many of these are quite durable over time. They're really significant in terms of the geographic coverage. Obviously, what's happening in these areas or not happening in these areas in terms of fishing is pretty important to think about. But we're really hopeful that this database can support everybody's work. So please do feel free to check it out, and I'm happy to take questions on it. And then just to acknowledge the members of the team, the subcommittee members who came from the different councils, some staff at NOAA Fisheries that were part of our subcommittee and helped with the vetting our GIS data and then also providing it to other processes. Staff at the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission and the guidance of the Council's Coordination Committee. So thanks, that's all I have.
Thanks, Michelle. So that, I want to especially thank the council for the Lautenberg Coral Conservation Area. That was just a huge success and such a great example of turning data into action, as Mimi was talking about. It's not easy to do, and it requires some really strong political will and strong leadership that the council provided, so we're all very grateful for that. So what we're doing now is, you see we started at the federal level and then went to the regional scale, and now we are going to talk about at the state level, and Will Isenberg is here to talk about the Virginia Ocean Plan, which is near and dear to my heart, something that I actually started trying to do a state ocean plan before the RPB was formed. And then when the RPB was formed, we decided to put our Virginia CZM money into the regional ocean plan. And then when we had an executive order that eliminated the RPBs, I thought, well, it's time we do a state plan again, with our hope being that as New York has developed a state plan, and I know Delaware's working on a state plan, Virginia's working on one, that if we all do our state plans and then come together and see where we have some commonalities, that we as a region can bring a much stronger voice on those recommendations that we would like to have NOAA and everyone else adopt. So I've left a big job for the Virginia CCM staff to try to do this. So let's hear how it's going.
Sure, thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Will Isenberg, work in the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, and before I get into the presentation, yesterday we saw a lot of presentations with lots of amazing figures and lots of amazing charts. I'm a data person. I love and can stare at that kind of stuff all day. I know that's shared with others. This presentation is not going to be one of those, but I ask you to kind of put the lens that we're using as we're developing this plan on, as I go through this presentation. You'll probably hear some echoes of this as I'm going through it, but the idea that here in Virginia, we don't have a state mandate to be it legislative, executive, what have you, to be developing this plan. So a big part of this effort is building stakeholder buy-in and building the case for the recommendations that we're ultimately making. So I do have one chart at the end, just for chart's sake and to make a point. But for those data folks, hold on and carry that lens as we go through today's presentation. So just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about, first I'm going to kind of couch things in the role that Virginia CZM, the program I work in, and that Laura led for so many years, our role kind of in conservation planning in general. Talk a little bit about some work that one of our partner agencies is working on for marine mammal and sea turtle conservation plans, and then really spend the bulk of the presentation talking about the Virginia Ocean Plan development, zooming into the work group that's really focusing on topics that are being covered in this symposium, the Sustainability and Conservation Work Group. So again, just to kind of frame it in the program and our role in conservation in general, it's important to understand how Virginia CZM is set up. A lot of coastal zone management programs are set up all within one agency, and while I'm housed and work for the Department of Environmental Quality, we're the lead agency for what we call a networked program. And that's illustrated by this graphic over here on the left. That shows all the different state agencies and local governments in the coastal zone that have enforceable policies that protect coastal resources. So all of those different agencies are a part of our program, are a part of Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. And by enforcing those policies or administering those policies, they play a role in conservation in the coastal zone. And it's important, bringing people together to coordinate around shared goals, shared interests is really important, but something that makes that happen is bringing funding to the table. So we're really blessed to have regular annual funding from NOAA to the amounts of around $3 million, and that's used in a number of different ways. Some ways to keep programs continuing to move forward, just pay for staff for those programs in these networked agencies, or working on projects to kind of advance our conservation and other coastal management goals. So with that context, a good example of something like that is the work that our networked agency, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, is working on. And that's these two plans, the marine mammal and sea turtle conservation plans. One of their enforceable policies, one of the many that they have, is the responsibility to protect and manage Endangered Species Act species. A little bit redundant there, but so that's one of their goals, and as a part of that, they're developing these two plans and working on just their overall comprehensive state wildlife action plan. As a part of developing those plans all together, what it opens up is federal support, in some cases things like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's state wildlife grants, but more importantly what those do is they develop goals and strategies to achieve those goals that work to address these species, in this case marine mammals and sea turtles, who have low and declining populations, and come up with those goals and strategies to recover those populations and better manage them and better understand them so that we can manage them well. It's worth noting that neither of these plans are complete yet, so I don't know exactly what the goals or strategies are going to be in them, but they will be, like I said, a part of those state wildlife action plan, as well as appendices, and inform some of the recommendations in the Virginia Ocean Plan. So talking about that a little bit, this plan is a multifaceted thing. It's not just looking at conservation things, but also all of the uses occurring out in the ocean and how do we better manage them. So things like maritime, security, commercial and recreational fishing, etc. So it's covering a lot of things, but like I said, as I'm going to get into this presentation, I'll zoom into more of the sustainability and conservation type topics. But I wanted to show this first, just to kind of illustrate where our focus is for this plan. It's in the offshore areas off of Virginia's shores. But I'm sure as many of you are looking at this, you see a lot of hard lines and you think about species and uses, and they don't really honor those lines. And yeah, that's the lesson we learned. We started with a focus area to drive our conversations offshore, since we have a lot of work already occurring in our coastal and estuarine areas. But inevitably, the conversations and the recommendations we're discussing right now in our work group process is moving more coastal as well, understanding that it's kind of really hard to divorce the offshore realm from the coastal realm. So, Laura kind of set this up a little bit, but you might be wondering, why are we developing an ocean plan? The story was illustrated well. Started state, went regional. That was remanded back to the states with an executive order. But I think the bigger issue, or the bigger reason of why we're doing this planning effort, is illustrated really well by this screenshot from the Marco Ocean Data Portal. This is just with a few of the layers turned on, showing different uses like maritime uses, some commercial fishing uses, some offshore wind uses. In no way an exhaustive display, because that would just be overwhelming and assault your eyes. But the lesson, or the message there really is that this is an incredibly busy environment. We know it's getting busier. There are existing uses that are expanding. There are new uses coming out into this offshore environment. So as it gets more busy, as it gets more complicated, this more comprehensive, holistic view to ocean resource management needs to happen somewhere, and we think that can happen through this state plan. In a couple slides, I'm going to cover the 5 goals that we have for this plan, but because going through 5 goals is a lot, I always like to summarize this down to 3 main things that we're trying to accomplish with this, and that's to communicate just the landscape that's out there. What's the policy landscape? Who are the actors? What are the uses? Those kinds of things. And then also understanding who are the actors, who's working out there, working to coordinate better among them. Some of these groups are really good at getting together and coordinating among their select group of uses, but not everybody has a seat at the table, and inevitably that leads to issues down the line when new things are coming on board, opportunities to better plan are missed. So the goal there also is to better coordinate. Then lastly, through those coordinative efforts, try and identify needs, because we know there's lots of policy out there that says this is how things happen, maybe by project, maybe by sector, but as you look at the bigger picture, these needs start to arise for policies, for more data collection, et cetera. And so communicate, coordinate, and identify needs is really the 3 things that we're trying to achieve with this plan. Laura mentioned we've been at this for a while, but just for convenience sake and thinking more about how this exact plan has been developed, its work really started in earnest in 2022 with a group of state agencies and academics that got together to work on developing what's going to go into the plan, essentially developing a plan outline. And a lot of that work was focused on what are the existing authorities we have within our state agencies to better manage these ocean resources. As we went through that process, and then as we moved into 2023, we brought the plan, or the intentions we have behind the plan, to our governor's administration, and they said, this should really be a bottom-up effort coming from all the stakeholders from the bottom to really inform what the priorities are for ocean resource management. So we spent the later half of 2023 working very hard to bring lots of different federal, state partners into the conversation. This included everybody from the experts on certain topics to the experienced users who are out there, brought them to the table, and we were able to identify somewhere over 120 different folks who are now informing our work group process and our steering committee process, which is where we're at right now here in 2024. The goal is for that to wrap up around the end of the year, around the end of the calendar year, and then move into next year into plan drafting and review process. I wanted to mention there are these 6 different work groups. You can kind of see the different topic areas that we're working on by that, but like I said, for the remainder of this presentation, I want to zoom in on the sustainability and conservation work group. And their charter, here's our 5 goals, is really driven by goals 3 and 4, which I'm just going to focus in here to not read through all of these. And goal 3, the second half there being minimize and mitigate impacts to ocean habitat, marine life, and ecosystem functions. And then goal 4, looking more forward-looking, increase resilience of ocean uses, ocean habitat, and marine life to a changing ocean. So those boil down to what this work group is really working on, these 3 objectives, to try and make the different ocean uses more sustainable, describe what's changing out there as part of making a case for the things that we have to do, and then identify ways that we can prepare for and mitigate those changes. In terms of what will go into the plan, like I mentioned, we're still in the drafting phase. We're still in the discussions, really. So I don't know exactly what's going to go into the plan, but the plan right now is that we're going to have sections that really cover the landscape. So again, kind of that communicate side of things. Cover the landscape of what's out there in terms of policies, statutes, things like NEPA, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, but then also, what are the different programs and policies within those that are being implemented out there as well. Those aforementioned sea turtle and marine mammal conservation plans will take a role there. Also understanding the marine mammal and sea turtle stranding networks and how they play a role in all of this and the partners that interface with them. So describing that kind of landscape, then objective 2, describing the changes that are occurring. The goal here is to be kind of high level, not to have a full academic exercise, but like I've mentioned a few times, really make the case for why the following recommendations need to be implemented. And then based on the conversations we're having with the experts in these work groups, we're going to be documenting the recommendations that we've agreed on for how to advance this better resource management. And as Laura mentioned, as we're going through this, we're thinking a lot about where are the opportunities to take this regionally? Where would this have better effect if, a lot of these species that we're talking about spend time in Virginia's water, or the waters offshore Virginia, and then move up into the Northeast, throughout the Mid-Atlantic, down into the Southeast. So there's opportunities for regional management here, as well as just partnering with different states on things. Lastly, or almost lastly, thinking about implementation, this is really summed up by our goal number 5. The goal here is not for this to be a one-off effort. It's for it to be a living document, something that is continued to be updated at regular intervals. And part of the way that we're going to realize that is by setting up a coordinative body that takes all of these different perspectives, all of these different uses, and continues to meet on this topic, continue a lot of these conversations, help them be implemented, and also just kind of deal with issues as they arise, as opposed to waiting for another planning cycle. And then lastly, as I mentioned, kind of framed the conversation in the beginning, implementation without a mandate is hard, but something that CZM can bring to the table is this annual funding to try and continue some of these recommendations forward. But like I said at the beginning, our big goal here really is to make the case for this and try and build the relationships and the buy-in so that we have that continued implementation. It's a hard goal, but something we're rising to. The last thing I want to leave you with, mostly because it gets a figure into my presentation, but also it really illustrates something really important for all of us, and this was echoed yesterday. I forget the speaker, but I was like, yes, that's exactly my point. So we had a public input process that's still ongoing, and something that we've been asking folks to do is share their priorities, their concerns, and their interests as it relates to ocean resource management. And one of the questions on just a survey that we have is, what are your priority uses? And right from the start, this is an outdated figure. It's continued this trend and continued to grow, is that marine life and habitat rose to the top immediately as a thing that folks really value as a priority use. And I think this is not news to everybody. As we have conversations on resource management out in the ocean, this comes up in all the conversations as a priority for people. And while this number is very small and in no way statistically significant, and definitely merits us to dive in deeper and ask a broader swath of the population, I think as our charge of building the case for why the work that we're doing is important, and the work that everybody in this room is doing is important, is just reflected really well by this figure. And I know that that number with a larger sample size would continue to represent something just like that. So with that, thank you all for listening to the work we're doing in Virginia, and happy to take questions over here.
Thank you so much, Will. Great job, Will. I just feel so relaxed and grateful that I've left the CZM program in such good hands between Will and Ryan, the manager. They're doing a great job, so thank you. I know we're running a bit late, but are we okay with, we're okay with some Q&A time. So, any questions from anybody for any of our speakers? I think we still have Mimi and Lauren online, don't we? Are they still with us? Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, all right. Questions? Yeah, Mary.
Can I just speak up?
I can hear you. Can you hear online? I'm not sure. It probably helps to use the microphone.
Hi. This is great, and obviously all the work that's going on is absolutely amazing and overwhelming. So thank you all for everything you guys are all doing. But one question I have is that we're building all these plans. What's not really clear to me is what the actual goals or objectives are. You know, what are we trying to get to in a real clear quantitative way? And then, like for some of these, how are we measuring our progress towards them, right? Because it's really nice to be able to set these, objectives, but if we don't know what we're trying to protect or how well we're doing it, the question of baselines coming up, where are we starting from, where are we trying to get to, I think is really helpful to understand. At one time we talked about having like dashboards where we could monitor our progress going forward, and we haven't really been talking too much about that, maybe a little bit in the indicators work. So I'm just curious if, any of you have a real clear sense about how we determine how effective are these habitat protected areas in terms of achieving a conservation outcome.
Yeah, anyone want to go for that?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say from a council fishery management perspective, it's challenging to measure whether our areas are doing what we think. I mean, if we're restricting fishing in an area, bottom fishing especially, it's because we're hoping to protect the structures there, protect like the benthic ecology there. Most of the species we manage in the Northeast for fisheries are species that live closely associated with the seafloor. But in order to know if you're having a benefit, you need to go do the science to look at the seafloor and monitor it over time, and that's tricky. I guess as a proxy for success, one thing we do routinely in fisheries management is assess stocks. And I'm not going to pretend that that's like a simple or perfect process or it doesn't have a lot of error, but we do get those kind of trends over time. And so, fundamentally we're seeing how those species are responding to these habitats. But it's complicated by the fact that we have a bunch of other measures in place, catch limits. So it's not an easy question. It's something we definitely wrestle with. We're working closely with our partners at NOAA on indicators and understanding the ecosystem. And somebody said something earlier about maybe it was Mimi, like translating information into decisions. And we're trying to figure out how to do that with climate and ecosystem indicators, how to use the movement of one and the long-term trends of one to make our decisions more strategically, kind of where to think about issues of risk, kind of how risk averse we can be or should be, or where we can relax a little bit and allow some greater catch for species that are sort of climate winners. So those are hard questions, but we're trying to work on it in a structured way that's then transparent to the public that we regulate.
Yeah, and I would just add also something we wrestle with. I think with the way that the ocean plan is being developed in Virginia, the variety of, we've been having this conversation recently of what should the structure of the recommendations be. And as we tried to impose more structure on it, we realized we were narrowing what was possible to be recommended, as well as overly anticipating in some cases what would be picked up for implementation. So if you overprescribe something, it may not make it flexible to somebody's needs in the future. But one thing that we're trying to explore as you develop these recommendations is the who, what, where, when, why. And that may not specifically spell out the metrics for measuring success, but it can give you a good sense for as many of the parameters as possible to then, depending on the recommendation, say it's something around ocean acidification, which is a conversation we're having. Maybe deeper within there, the hows, you can start to have some of those conversations about, well, what should we be measuring to understand where we're making progress and whatnot. So it's very topic dependent what and if you should be measuring it, but it is part of the conversation that we're having, and as these things go, there's trade-offs to every decision.
Great, thank you, Will and Michelle. Lauren or Mimi, anything you want to add?
I'll just add briefly that I think one of the needs that we recognized in developing the ocean biodiversity strategy was the need for just baseline information on ocean biodiversity. And so the strategy really does lay out a lot of actions that federal agencies and working in cooperation with states and other partners can take to pull together existing data, put it in harmonized formats, make it readily accessible to really get at that better picture of what the biodiversity looks like now, and also then start thinking about what indicators do we need for how it's going to be changing in the future based on climate change and other factors. And then I think the other component that the speakers just addressed is how do we know that our management measures are working? And that's more of an effectiveness of the management measures itself. And just as an example, the sanctuary system conducts condition reports about every 10 years to look at one particular place in the ocean and how it's changing over time and relate that back to the management of that place.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Yeah, we have a question in the back. Little microphone issue.
So this question is for Lauren and Michelle. My understanding is that summer 2025 Hudson Canyon research crews will be jointly organized by NOAA Sanctuaries, NOAA Fisheries, and NOAA Office of Exploration. Another example of great coordination in the region. What opportunities do panelists see for collaboration with MARCO, as well as stakeholders, industry, academic, NGOs, et cetera, from the region? Second part. I will note that the Sanctuary Advisory Council for the proposed Hudson Canyon National Marine Sanctuary is in the process of creating 2 work groups, one focused on scientific research and a second on education and outreach. The work groups are getting stood up this fall and are open to Sanctuary Advisory Committee members and alternates, as well as partners not on the Sanctuary Advisory Committee. So I think the question part is, what opportunities do you see for collaboration with MARCO and other stakeholders in the region?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Hudson Canyon. I'll give you a couple of thoughts, and it sounds like you might have some great ideas too, which is fantastic. I think that one of the things that NOAA and partners do really well is relate offshore exploration back to people on shore through telepresence, schools, and really help people understand the amazing resources and values of these places that may seem very far offshore and remote. And so I do think that that's one area where MARCO and others can help connect, is through that engagement and outreach around what people are finding and why it matters.
Great. Anyone else on opportunities for collaboration?
Well, I'll just say that, so I volunteered for the science and research work group, so I'm excited for that work. The councils around the country are involved in the sanctuary program, kind of communicating what we do. I think in terms of opportunities, the Hudson Canyon is, there's some commercial fishing, there's a lot of recreational fishing, so there's people that are out there, even though it's pretty far offshore, understanding the environment in real time and kind of figuring out how to bring their observations into the process and how to use that to design some of the work. I think as fishery management councils, and we've done work on deep sea coral conservation, we sort of know the types of information that resonated with our decision makers and kind of how we communicated that to them. Having a lot of the images from these deep water cruises was really important as the Mid-Atlantic was doing their Lautenberg zone and as we were developing our complementary zone south of Georges Bank. So we can certainly provide some of that perspective. We can get information about these programs out to the fishing community. We kind of have a kind of broad group of folks that we communicate with. So it's just a raising awareness. I mean, being at this meeting, I'm learning about programs and projects that I wasn't aware of. So I think that kind of continual communication with different types of users and then can, just bring awareness and support. Really realizing that the sanctuary is not an, anti-fishing. It's a kind of partnership, a shared use place, and getting people to be comfortable with that, I think, is pretty important. So the more we talk about it, hopefully that helps.
Great. We have 3 questions. We have Tony and some folks in the back.
Hi, good morning. Not so much a question as maybe a comment and free airtime. This follows much of what Lauren has presented. I'm Alan Lee. I'm the chair of the proposed Hudson Canyon Sanctuary Advisory Council. So I wanted to take an opportunity to say hello and maybe on a local level, invite participants here to be involved in the proposed Hudson Canyon Sanctuary designation process. As I'm sure Lauren can say much better than I can, this is a process that does invite much public involvement, different stakeholders, and there is the research cruise coming up, proposed in summer 2025. But if you go on the website, NOAA's website for the proposed Hudson Canyon Sanctuary, there's a lot of great information, there's a lot of great contacts, and I hope this is an opportunity to promote dialogue, especially within this community that's here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, and welcome. That's great. Thank you for your work.
I just wanted to say the same. Thanks, Alan. Really appreciate you speaking up.
I think Tony, well, we've got one more person.
Is it on? Oh, there. My name is Cindy Ziff. I'm Executive Director of Clean Ocean Action, and always enjoy hearing about the wonderful work that's being done to, conserve and protect. I guess, sort of the gigantic industrial question is, with all this massive, massive offshore wind development, which is profoundly going to change the ecosystem from Maine down to South Carolina, at least, in this real time, very, very soon, how are we going to protect and conserve in these very rapidly changing natural ecosystems into a very industrial one?
I could give a start of an answer to that, but definitely not the answer. So, in Virginia, we've had a long time planning and building up for the offshore wind project that we have, the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project. However, looking to our partners up north, like New Jersey in particular, and just a lot of the collaboration in the New York Bight, there's a lot of lessons for us to learn there. The way things have been working in Virginia is the baseline data, the collections for studies, have been really a negotiation between the developer, Dominion Energy, and the researchers. And so something we've identified as a need through this process is that conversation really needs to happen in a lot of ways, like New Jersey has set up, outside of that relationship, where you can say, here are the real research priorities we have, the real management needs that we have, how do we get at them, and identify funding sources to get at that, as opposed to leaving that to a conversation, not saying it's any ill-willed conversation, but a more limited and resource-limited conversation between the developer and BOEM and the researchers. So that's something we're talking about how to get to, don't have the answers. Honestly feel a little bit behind the ball on that. I mean, as RWC showed yesterday, the number of studies that are at least coordinated through, or RWC is aware of in our region, was much smaller than up here. So we definitely have a lot of catch up to do there, but are thinking and talking about it and trying to take the good lessons that our partners in the region are undertaking.
Great. Thanks, Will. Tony, probably last question, right?
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's a little bit of a different version of Cindy's question from a perspective is, and riffing off of something that was in Will's presentation about without a mandate, implementation is hard. And so I think interjecting new things like biodiversity, which I'm like 1,000% support of, seems like a new thing because there's no real clear management objective with regard to biodiversity and nature positive sustainability. So I guess my question is, how do we make the case that the environment crossing all of your management mandates, whether it's fisheries, NOAA, marine protected areas, other things, is going to be a nature positive biodiversity? Because I think it can sometimes, it's a really laudable goal, but if you recall, we had a very robust effort that Laura was very supportive of, characterizing ecologically rich areas, which was the terminology we used, literally just to say, bringing the best information we had about some of the things you all are talking about, and there was a pushback against that. So how do we really get to things that aren't really mandates? And again, I think you all necessarily, and in a way, try to do the best with your specific mandates. And I think everybody's doing that, or beginning to do that. but I don't think there's this specific, clear direction for nature-positive, resilient ecosystems. So, sorry, big question, but I just feel like that's, it's kind of like, everybody will do a good job, but there's not that real clear mandate that really is defined by biodiversity and sustainability.
Yeah. Totally agree, Tony. And maybe that's going to be really good fodder for the World Cafe tomorrow, that we all can really think about that. I mean, it takes such tremendous political will, and there are so many forces against it, mainly economic forces. You know, whether it's people wanting more fisheries or more wind energy or whatever it is, and there are so few that are standing up for nature itself. You know, who represents the whales and the sea turtles and the, you know, all the little worms in the sand on the bottom. It's tough.
And not to get into discussion, but I do recommend both Will's observation about wildlife and habitat do end up really high on
Yeah,
people's general
yeah.
preference. And also I do recommend the Lemfest work that I can't remember if it was Lauren or Vivi mentioned, because it really is very rooted in community caring about
Yeah.
those things. So it's not just about science biodiversity, which we heard about yesterday, which is important, or the science conservation, but I do think they're building that community connection to connect them to what they in fact do care about and have said that, but don't really know what to do with that from an actionable perspective.
So everybody be thinking about that and come up with some really good ideas for tomorrow. So just want to give another hand to this great panel. Thank you so much. And I also can't get off here without also thanking Jay Odell for his help. He was my partner in crime with developing the Marco Ocean Data Portal. And thank goodness he accepted my request to take on a grant to get it started. And of course, followed up with a lot of support from all of you and NOAA especially. So, and the Moore Foundation. Is Sean here somewhere? He was here. Anyway, we're just really grateful for all that help, and it was really, really fun doing that with Jay. So, on to the next session, right? We have a little break. Do we have time for a little break? A short one? Okay. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't really know much about your ocean. I mean, I don't really work in the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Are there other, I mean, Massachusetts and Rhode Island obviously has one. Long Island has the Blue Plan for the Sound.
Yeah.
Rhode Island, Connecticut.
Yeah,
Yeah, but some of that might have been University of Rhode Island. It's okay. We'll just have to keep this one short. Well,
Can you type it in there?
this will be so short, I think. It's going to have to be. There's a rumor that there's going to be a John Bogner sighting here.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, we invited him. I know Nick had this split early. He was going to at least try to come for the poster session at the end is there's going to be some students here who will demo where we are with the mobile app version for the portal.
So I was actually coming here today for the New Jersey Offshore Wind Strategic Plan meeting in Tony's building. Starts at 1:15. Now we're at 45. So my session's gonna end at 1:15. Hightail it over.
That's what I'm just going over here.
Are you?
Yeah, we're just going over here. We're gonna do away with the break after this session.
Okay, just go straight into it.
15 minutes, we're straight into the session. We're asking Jim to tighten this up a little bit. So we're hopeful to get to you somewhere around 11, a little bit late.
Okay, but not too late.
But not too late. And then,
Okay, I'll be fisting sandwiches as I run over to the
no,
building.
I think we did fine because,
I was coming here